Hello everyone and welcome to this year's PRCA 2022 Trends event. My name is Koray Kamgoz. I'm the Director of Communications and Marketing for the PRCA. Thank you so much for joining us for this session. We're really excited today to have 6 outstanding speakers reflect on some of the issues, trends and considerations for PR and communications professionals in 2022. So the way this is going to work is we're going to ask each speaker to deliver a quick fire 5-minute presentation on a key issue or trend. And we're going to work our way through the talks as quickly as possible. So we'll jump from presentation to presentation so that we can free up as much time as possible at the end for your questions. So a quick bit of housekeeping before we get started. As I said, we'd love this session to be as interactive as possible. So please do feel free to ask as many questions as you can. When doing so, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen rather than the chat function, just so we can keep an eye on which questions have been answered so far. And please do bear in mind this session is being recorded. It will be available on our YouTube channel. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe and you can get a notification of that when the video goes live. And finally, do feel free to share your perspectives and your reactions and your feedback to today's session using the hashtag PRCA22Trends. Right, we haven't got much time, so I'm going to dive straight into it with our first speaker. So Alex Stevens from Reuben Sinclair. Alex is Head of PR and Communications Recruitment at Reuben Sinclair. Established in 2007, Reuben Sinclair is the leading PR, digital and marketing recruitment consultancy and the sole talent partner of the PRCA. Alex works with in-house PR teams and PR agency leaders to advise on all aspects of talent acquisition from best practice recruitment processes to employer branding. Alex also offers career guidance to PR professionals from entry to board level. And I know obviously talent has been a huge issue for our members of late. So really interested to hear what Alex has to say. So Alex, it's over to you.
Thank you, no pressure then. I'm just going to share my screen because I do have a couple of slides just to keep me on track. Hopefully you will be able to see this. I'm going to into speaker view. Cool. So as I've already mentioned, I am a recruiter. So as a recruiter, I'm going to talk about why I think 2022 could be the year of change when it comes to talent. And firstly, I want to kind of set the scene and sort of state the obvious really, but there's clearly been a resurgence in the PR industry. Everyone seems to be hiring and filling vacant positions seems to be more difficult than it's ever been. Certainly from a recruitment perspective, and multiple companies are competing for the same people. Candidates are therefore undoubtedly in the driving seat. And talking of trends, this is something that we probably expect to happen certainly through the first quarter of this year and likely into Q2 as well. So with it being harder than ever to hire, resignations are probably the worst possible news for an employer. And so they are doing everything they can to keep their teams happy. Pay rises and promotions are very often, they're no longer overlooked, and employees are typically recognised for their work now. And generally what we're finding is that people are feeling pretty comfortable in their jobs, which begs the question, if you're comfortable in your role, why would you leave? Well, certainly the most commonly cited reason that we're finding when we're talking to candidates is to make some kind of change. And change, as we know, is such an individual thing. So there's no silver bullet here and you can't be everything to everyone. Some people are looking for a change in the size of organisation they're working in. For some, it's a different sector. Some are looking for more purpose in their work. Some are just looking to broaden their skill set. But the underlying theme is that candidates no longer are looking to move for a like-for-like role and just for sort of a pay rise or promotion. And frankly, if they did just want a pay rise or promotion, they could probably ask for it where they are and get it. So for employers, it's never been more important to be able to articulate what your employee value proposition is. So that's the reason why someone would choose to work for you over anyone else. And your employer brand strategy really needs to define what makes you different and why joining you might provide that change that somebody is looking for. I think that we often find that employer brand is quite typically overlooked in favour of branding to target an organisation's consumer audience. But I think that shouting about why you're a great place to work should be no different to that. And I mentioned that you can't really be all things to all people. So if somebody's looking to move to a big organization and you're a team of 20, obviously you can't change that. There's not much you can do about it. But as with any form of promotion, being honest and authentic will attract the right people. And ultimately, the things that you do better than anyone else, whether that's your benefits or your work-life balance, your commitment to well-being, your purpose, it might even be your existing people, whatever it is, those things will be the change that someone is looking for. Similarly, as a PR professional, being in the driving seat means that there has never been a better time to make a change. And I don't want to get accused of being a typical recruiter and trying to encourage everyone to leave their jobs, because that's not necessarily what I'm saying. But what I mean by making a change is taking the chance perhaps to learn a new skill, or to broaden your responsibilities in your current company, or even maybe ask for that promotion. Your employer likely won't want to lose you. And if they don't, it means that they probably should try and work with you to create that change that you want to see. Employers should really try and take note here, because I think previously retention has been about throwing money at the problem, and it's not anymore. It shouldn't be about that anyway. And what it can be about is trying to create non-traditional career paths for people that don't necessarily want that linear route that we're so used to seeing. For example, in PR agencies, so many PR professionals join as account exec and then work their way up to director, and that's just kind of the route that you take. And that's not necessarily something that everyone wants to do. They might want to kind of focus on a particular area, like client services or content or digital. And you might not necessarily be able to create different career paths for everyone, but if you can provide opportunities that were otherwise unthought of, you'll not only retain key individuals, but you'll also provide reassurance to the wider team that their career options are very much open. And ultimately, if you have had that conversation with your current employer and there aren't any options for you and they're not willing to make a change, then there is always other opportunities out there. And I am a recruiter, so that's always going to come out of my mouth at some point. And as hiring managers, there is real opportunity here, because there are people looking for jobs, but because moving for a like-for-like role with the sole incentive of a pay rise or promotion is so uncommon at the moment, for the people that you would probably traditionally hire likely don't really want to come and work for you. So you need to take the opportunity to look for candidates that do want to make that career change and see how you can make that something that you can offer. So they might not have all the finished skills, but they might have the potential, and that's the really key thing. For me, in my opinion, attitude and aptitude should always trump work experience every single time. So you can get ahead of competitors by taking a chance on a candidate that is looking to make a change. And that can mean looking outside of the PR industry entirely and offering, further opportunity to then diversify the industry, not only in terms of welcoming people from minority backgrounds, but also diversity of thinking, approach, and creativity. So while it's unlikely that there'll be a talent shortage throughout the entirety of 2022, my hope is that some of the changes that we see in the first half of the year will be adopted more permanently. And that means that maybe it's less about change and maybe it's more about opportunity, and the opportunity to do something different, the opportunity to hire somebody a bit different, and maybe the opportunity generally to be a bit different. So maybe 2022 is less about a year of change and more about the year of opportunity. And that's it.
Alex, thank you so much for that. That was fascinating. And yeah, absolutely. Sounds like a great time to reset our approach to recruitment across the board. So thank you so much for that. And I'm sure we'll have a couple of questions at the end for you on that subject. Next up, we have John Brown from Don't Cry Wolf. So John Brown is a communications consultant with over a decade of experience helping brands from Virgin Media to Brockton, McAfee, and the Wellcome Trust build affinity with their audiences. He's the founder of Don't Cry Wolf, a consultancy built around no-nonsense brands that are looking for creative and strategic flair without the smoke and mirrors. He's also the chair of our PRCA Climate Misinformation Strategy Group. So we're delighted to have you join us, John. And yeah, it's over to you for 5 minutes, starting from now.
Wow, what an intro. Can everyone see this? Fantastic. Yeah. Wonderful. Hello. So I'm going to go through 4 trends in 5 minutes and see where it gets us. We'll probably get to trend 1 and then I'll start ranting, but that will be fine. Join me on this journey as I take your hand through this. And if you don't like anything that I'm saying, or well, keep that to yourself, but if you love it, then please do tweet me at @BrownBear, or get in touch via the company. There's a complaints form on there as well. So trend 1, Claims without evidence will be dismissed without evidence. I think this is one of the key things that we're going to see happen and emerge over 2022. I think we can all sort of sense where the political climate is heading right now. And what this essentially means is that as an organisation that is about to embark on a massive campaign making quite extraordinary claims of either saving the world or sort of a planetary know-how, needs to actually complement that with some evidence. And this year is absolutely crucial that this happens. We had COP26 last year. Let's not make this flop 22 this year. And it's important that if we're going to do that, we need to start getting much more comfortable with asking for receipts. So when we're working with our clients, when we're working with our brands, when we're working for our bosses, this year is going to be the year that we don't just idly stumble into a campaign and hope for the best, but it's actually going to be the year that we need to make sure that our campaigns are well complemented with the evidence required to prove our points that we're trying to make. We've got an audience now that is seriously concerned about the level of disingenuous content that is getting out there in the wider world. And so it's important that if we're going to be an authentic, honourable, trustworthy brand or business, when we're going forward with these claims and these campaigns, we're doing so with the strength of evidence behind us. And that's what will make those campaigns fearless. So it's absolutely crucial that this year, this trend that we're going to see is going to be the year that if you're going live with a claim without any evidence, don't be surprised that it's going to be dismissed without evidence as well. Trend 2, vulnerability will be very, very vogue this year. And actually, I think this is quite a good thing, although the sarcasm in my voice doesn't say so, but it is going to be quite an important thing. I think we've got past this idea that a brand is entirely perfect, impenetrable, and always needs to hold some level of kind of false guise in front of it. I think what we are going to see, and actually there's some great examples recently, Ace and Tate did this recently around, actually, look, this is what we've got wrong. And actually coming up with some line, some approach, some form of communications that says, do you know what, we're totally imperfect, because that's quite human. There's humanity behind imperfection. There's something delightful about noticing an imperfection and actually leaning into it and saying, look, this is actually not all the magnificent things that we're doing right, but over here, all of the things that we've kind of got wrong and we need to really improve on. And I think this year will be the year where vulnerability becomes much more in vogue for us as comms professionals and for brands. And I think we should actually embrace that. We should welcome vulnerability and look to see how we can bake that into the work that we're doing authentically. Obviously, don't just pretend that you're being vulnerable, like do so with a bit of passion, bit of courage behind it. But if you do that, I think what you'll start to find is that you'll connect on a really, really human level. So from a trends perspective, I'm hoping and I'm really looking forward to seeing more organizations, institutions, individuals start to communicate with a bit of vulnerability in their tone, with a bit of vulnerability in the work that they're doing. I think we're going to have better connections as a result. But look at trend 3, populism will force brands to pick a side. We can't sit on the fence anymore, folks. It can't happen. You know, we know the shitstorm that we've got going on right now, all the way around the world, and then in our own in our own corridors of power. And to be honest with you, if you're briefing into your comms teams or you're receiving a brief that says, hey, we're apolitical, we don't pick a side, we're forever, it's not good enough anymore, and it won't be this year. People want to see and understand that a brand has a position to take, or that an organization, what's the principles that it holds dear? What does it represent? What's the vision of the world that it wants to operate within? And what does it see as its place within that world? I know that sounds deeply worthy, but on a sort of personal level, I kind of want to know, are you a shithead or are you not? That's the kind of thing that I need to understand from an organization and from a brand. So I do want to know which side of the fence do you sit on? Are you aligned with what I believe in or are you not? Now, you can do this in a way that actually involves others as well. So you're not just creating another separate tribe and leaning into that, but you're doing so in a way that you're listening and you're understanding from other voices that might not necessarily represent your tone or your view or your approach as a brand. And you listen courteously, but then you put forward your position and you make it clear as to why that is. You make it clear as to why you've adopted this position, that you've taken this stand. We've just seen Unilever raked over the coals for doing a few things in 2020, but it committed to its ethics. It committed to its position. It said, no, do you know what? We are going to take a stand around climate change. We are going to take a stand around whether or not we're going to allow our products to be sold in a place that is still a conflict zone and that still requires a lot of attention. And actually, that's a fairly honourable thing to do if you're doing so with courtesy and with clarity of mind. We're going to see that more. You need to pick a side. You need to explain why. I think, oh, that's not it. The last trend. This is like my key slide. It's got a picture of Francis on it. Look at it, gorgeous. This. I want to end on a positive note. I think there's a lot of industries out there, creative industries out there, that are kind of floating in the dark around how they want to set a standard around ethics, environmental measurement, looking at how we can improve diversity. I think genuinely this year, with the changes, with the direction, with the voice that we've got as a PR industry, we can absolutely set a standard for how an agency, an organisation, a comms team can measure itself against this high purpose, this high value, what we want to achieve. And I think that's going to come through, a bit of kicking and screaming. It's going to be a tough decision to make, but I do believe that we've got the commitment behind us now, whether it's the PRCA looking at how it's benchmarking its agencies, where it's the awards that we're entering in and asking, why isn't this being measured? I think now is a really important moment that the industry sets its standard. And that, I think, will lead the field. That's it. Much love.
John, thank you so much for that. There's a lot to unpack in that.
I don't even know how to stop my screen share. Hang on.
There you go. Yeah, thank you so much. I think that, yeah, as I said, there was so much in that. I love that idea or that concept that there's humanity behind imperfection. I think that's a really key lesson that we can all take away. Not to mention that I don't know what the word is for that image that you used at the end, but it was certainly impactful. But you make a really important point about the carbon footprint. We've gone through that process ourselves very recently. We've learned an awful lot from measuring our own carbon footprint. So I think there's you're spot on in that there's a real opportunity here for our industry to take advantage of this issue. John, I'm sure we're going to have a couple more questions from you based on the feedback that we've had. So do bear with us and we'll come back to you at the end with questions. So we'll move it on to our next presenter now. So delighted to introduce Michael Mpofu, who's from Worry and Peace. So Michael is the head of communications at Worry and Peace. He honed his craft at the heart of South African politics. He started as a journalist covering politics, one of the youngest in the country's parliamentary gallery, and then moved on to work alongside members of parliament, advising on policy and media communications. Michael's worked alongside the leader of the official opposition during the historic 2014 provincial and national election, where the party gained over 4 million votes, which was a first in South Africa. And prior to moving to the UK, he was a spokesperson for the Premier in the Western Cape Government regional government. So, Michael, pleasure to have you with us. You've got 5 minutes starting from now.
Thank you so much, Corey, and thank you to everyone who's decided to hang out with us today. I've done the cardinal sin of starting with my last slide, so let's see if we can save this. And not sure why I'm here, so I'll try and bring something worth taking away. So I've titled this one, this conversation, I suppose, "Make It Make Sense." Make it make sense. I'll read you a quote that I recently read on a blog by someone named Dan Brooks, and Dan puts the kind of nub of my really presentation into perspective here. This is what Dan Brooks says. He says, "This is how NFTs make me feel. The future is useless but expensive, and world-altering technology is now in the hands of a culture so aesthetically and spiritually impoverished that it should maybe go back to telling stories around the cooking fire for a while, just to remember how to mean something." Now, this, when I read this, it struck a chord with me because I've been in my line of work and where we are as a team, we've been seeing what this is, and this felt like the articulation of it in a really succinct way. And what do I mean by that? You know, firstly, you read it and think, wow, that's really clever English. But then you read it again and think, he's got a point. On the one hand, we've got this incredible tech, right? Tech and this metaverse, and it's all exciting and it's flashy, and us being stuck in front of our screens has probably accelerated that process of us going, oh, wow, let's play with the shiny thing. But on the other hand, are we using it in the way that we could be and should be? And more importantly, what does this actually mean for real life, if we're being completely honest? And if you're communicators, which is what is relevant to us today, this is how Michael puts it. If I can get my slide to change, that's exciting. It's becoming a lot easier, right, to download the app, sign up, search, or even be part of the free trial for 7 days and then cancel. We've all done that. But it's harder to speak to a human when it goes wrong. And I think anecdotally, I don't have a scientific stats to throw at this, but I think anecdotally, I speak for a lot of people on this call, myself included, working for a tech company. I've been one of those people who are like, hey, you promised on the one hand, convenience, ease, tip of your fingers. On the other hand, this isn't my lived experience. And there's a huge gap that I think we've, well, found ourselves in, whether the blame lies with one person or the other, that's neither here nor there. There's a huge gap between what we're offering as comms people, as organizations, as companies, and what we're actually delivering in reality. And while there's some people enjoying the benefits of this piece of equipment that we've given them, it's not the majority's feeling. So you give rise to what I call the gap. And there's a gap. And if you're a Londoner, you'll know this phrase, but it is quite literally something that I would argue we need to be so mindful of in 2022. As we emerge from the pandemic and go endemic, or whatever your views on it, someone needs to literally be watchful of this. If you're a comms person, leading a team, leading an organization, you almost need to assign someone to just make sure your messaging isn't leaving people behind in what you're saying and what you're doing, and practically in how you're being perceived. And I think a lot of organizations, whether they know it or not, people are signed up to your stuff, but the reality is they're not really engaged because you're not talking to where they really are. So I would argue, and I would suggest, this year belongs to people who can mind that gap. So this wouldn't be fancy or useful if I just left you with an anecdotal thought. So how do you do this practically? You listen. And it seems obvious, but not many of us are doing this enough. And by listen, I mean you throw the same amount of resource, incentive, whatever it is that you're using right now to get people to download the thing, to use it, or to engage with it. Throw that same level of resource or adapt it to listening to what they have to say. And I'm not just talking about a report that, say, the PRCA puts out, which are all valuable, by the way. I mean a report that you yourselves have gone to Michael, who's a user, and said, look, today we don't want you to buy, just talk at us. We'd love to know what you really think about what we're doing. Companies, organizations, teams, comms professionals need to actually be investing in listening devices, whatever that means for your context. Secondly, then you plug the gap. It's all well and fine to listen, but what are you going to do to plug that gap and bridge those two worlds? The metaverse world where you're pushing towards, but actually, mate, I just need you to pick up the phone because you messed up my insurance claim. So who am I going to speak to? Plug that gap and make sure you're doing it in a way that tells people, look, it's cool to dream, right? It's cool to want to aspire to, but we know millions of Brits are stuck in this phase because the reality is not everyone has got that lived experience. Plug the gap in the way that you need to. And more importantly, simplify. I think this is like a comms mistake, comms professional, whatever you want to call it. There's this peer pressure to come up with the next thing, which is cool. Don't get me wrong. I'm all for it. Heck, I spent my time, and as Corey has read out, coming up with catchphrases because we're selling ideas, right? I was paid to do that, and it's great. Problem is, you run the risk again of pulling this thing further and further. And here's a really tongue-in-cheek example of what I mean. Michael Jordan, everyone knows Michael Jordan, hopefully, knows Michael Jordan. He quits the NBA, plays baseball, and then decides, no, I'm actually better at basketball. And in his comeback, he released a press statement, and this is all it said: I'm back. And obviously, people knew Michael meant that literally, but more importantly, he meant to say, I'm back to lead, and I'm back to take over, and I'm back to dominate. And I think it would do us a world of service if we stripped away a ton of resource on trying to penetrate spaces that our audiences don't actually really care about. And all they want to know is, are you back? Because I need to actually speak to you physically. And I need you to solve a tangible problem that isn't in the metaverse. We need you to come and sort out the plumbing or whatever it may be. So I think this year really belongs to the communicators who can do that. Make it make sense. Whatever you're selling, whatever idea, whatever concept, whatever vision you have, can you translate that in a way that people actually go, yeah, this is not another one of those fancy, shiny apps. This thing actually makes sense. I hope this was useful for somebody, and it wasn't just a load of waffle. So on that, I'm not back, I'm gone. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks so much for that. There's a lot of useful insight that we can take away, especially against the backdrop of all the tech innovation that you referred to. So thanks very much for that. Conscious we're running ever so slightly behind the schedule, so I'm going to dive straight into the next presentation. Next up, we have Sarah Waddington from Astute. Sarah Waddington CBE is the owner of Astute.work, a pioneering hybrid agency which brings together the strongest management consultancy with strategic PR and marketing capability to help organizations build their social capital. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us and for giving us your time, and I'll hand over to you for your presentation.
Thanks, Corey. And listen, I hope Michael sends his presentation to HSBC, because bloody hell, they could listen to that. And everybody, I'm sorry if you thought John Brown's presentation was worthy, wait till you get into mine. I'm here to campaign for making social mobility and levelling up public relations a much needed trend that sticks around for a while. And in true Geordie style, I'm pretty sure that I can talk quickly enough, but hopefully legibly enough that we can get all through this and claw some of that time back. Well, this is rather obvious to me because I've been looking at this for a while, but people say to me, why is levelling up PR important and why should we be looking at it? Well, we've talked about it in the past through different industry bodies, but basically the public relations industry is just not serving the public that we're meant to be. We're not representative of it. And what's happening is year on year, we're seeing the data. It's just not happening. And if you look at the Sutton Trust and PRCA census, which comes out annually, 7% of the UK population attended fee-paying skills, and that's versus 21 working in PR. Now, you look at the national average, you look at what's happening to us, that immediately gives you a picture of the situation and the context that we're working in. But it's actually much, much worse than that. And the Creative Industries Policy and Evidence Centre brought out a really great report towards the end of last year. And it's actually really quite scary reading. And they say that our industries are represented by 250,000 working class people. And if you expolate that, can't even get the word right, to public relations, that comes down to 13,500 working class people that we're missing. And basically, the growth in our industries is disproportionately favoured the privileged. And okay, so that's a snapshot, but why is it important? Well, class intersects with gender, with race, with disability, skills, and with place. So these people who experience any of these actually have a double disadvantage. And with the pandemic, we've actually made the problem much, much worse. It's been exacerbated. So we need to make sure that social mobility is on the top of the agenda for all organisations. If you're an employer in our industry, this needs to be something that you're looking at hard, so that you diversify your teams and we are more representative. And I loved what Alex said earlier about attitude and aptitude, because actually that's a great place to start when you're recruiting and you're taking a longer term stance. You need to be thinking about that and not looking for someone who's in your own shadow, who's got a 2-1 from a Russell Group university. The time for that is over. It's very boring. It's not helping your organisation. It's not helping your clients. So move on. So what is the challenge? There are massive gaps in the market. There are lots of people talking about it, lots of organizations and initiatives trying to do the right thing. But not all of these are looking at social mobility. And so we do have a group of people who are very much left behind. I was doing an awful lot of research for Socially Mobile, which I'll come on to in a moment. If you look at what initiatives there are for people with disabilities, there are hardly any. They're really difficult to find. And I appreciate disabilities span a really diverse range of things, but really we've got to do better. There's policy guidance for women returners who we lose at a ridiculous rate year on year within our industry, but there's limited career support. It's good to see that there's specific groups for the LGBTQ plus community coming through, but they're only nascent and they're only just emerging. And a big area that we do need to think about is for our school leavers. What happens to the school leaver at 16 who hasn't actually done very well, but is really capable? We've got apprenticeships now, but we don't engage particularly well on a long-term consistent level with schools and those who are actually left already. How do we get to reach those? How do we make public relations an accessible industry and one that's appealing? Because at the moment, we're not doing that. And there's very limited action from businesses within this industry to make this different. So Stephen and I, my husband and I, co-founded Socially Mobile as one solution, and we're delighted to say that we're now up and running with our first cohort. And this is a 10-week exec education course, and it's in PR communications and leadership. And students graduate with a certificate in leadership in communication. And this is very much aimed at underserved groups. So we've got our Black, Asian and ethnic minority practitioner friends who can apply, the LGBTQ plus community, women returners and those with disabilities. And what we have are fully funded places for those who need them, but we also have pay places, and there are a dual reason for that. One, so that there is no stigma and shame attached with the program. Anybody can say they've been on it, but also so that this community interest company becomes sustainable. So it's a financial business model. And the aim is to help practitioners move from a tactical to strategic role. And in that way, that's a staged intervention so they can increase their earning potential. And they can choose, there's 7 core modules and 5 more that they can choose from over the course of the 10 weeks. And that's so they can choose what they need according to their own personal development needs, which is all great, but it's not a panacea. And there's lots of other initiatives out there for certain groups, but we need to do better. We need to link them. We need to be able to scale. And this is really why social mobility has to become a trend. We have to make it something that's more formalized, that we talk about, that it's accepted as being on the organizational agenda. So we need to make sure these initiatives can scale, there is financial support, and there's got to be a cultural shift. As Alex said, we can all change things from within. You don't have to start your own business necessarily. You don't necessarily have to move to a different agency or a different in-house team to make a difference. You can start to have a voice. You can start to do the practical things that are needed to make the change. And where I really want everybody to focus their attention and efforts is on this school leavers bracket. At the moment, Socially Mobile helps people who've got 2+ years experience in public relations, but I'm so very aware that that's fine and we're helping people who are already in the industry. But what about that huge gap from people who are not coming in? And at the moment, PR is for people who are mainly white, mainly middle class, and who've got network and money behind them, and it's just not acceptable. So that's all I've got to say. Can we make social mobility a trend? I hope so. Thanks for listening. Throw loads of questions at the end because I've got loads of answers. Thank you very much.
Sarah, that was awesome. Thank you so much for your time on that. And a huge congratulations on the launch of Socially Mobile. It's a really excellent initiative. If you haven't looked into it, if you haven't had a look around the scheme, please do check out the website. It is one of a few ways that we can actually make a real positive impact on the industry in terms of the demographic. So Sarah and Stephen as well, obviously, thank you so much for your time on it.
Thank you.
As always, if anyone has any questions, please do remember to use the Q&A function, and we'll come to those at the end. Do also share your perspectives on social using the hashtag PRCA22trends. Right, so we're on to the penultimate speaker now. Unfortunately, we had a late dropout. Whitney Daly was due to join us from Boston this morning. Unfortunately, she had a diary clash and was no longer able to make it. But fortunately, Phil Honor from Novelli has stepped in her place. Based in Manchester, Phil is a director at purpose-led comms consultancy Novelli, and leads their global marketing efforts with a particular focus on the US and Canadian markets. Phil, thank you so much for stepping in at such short notice, and I'll hand the floor over to you.
No problem. Thanks, Corey, and thanks for the opportunity. And what a great session it's been so far. And I can certainly speak to Sarah's point around how important the work of Socially Mobile is, as someone who's proudly working class and a school leaver did do that well. If I'd been around when I started my career, it would have been a very different story. So thank you for all the work that you're doing. But that's not why I'm here to talk. I'm here to try and beat John and share 3 thoughts in under 3 minutes, since we're very short of time. So I'll share my screen and see how we get on. 1 second, there we go. So at Portobello, we've spent the last 50 years banging the drum for good business, as a lot of you will know, and tracking the sentiment within the business community and employee groups to really understand the trends that clients seem to be watching that affect their businesses. And in 2021, as you'll all know, the issues came fast and furious, you know, from vaccine distribution and hesitancy to continued racial unrest in the US, threats to democracy worldwide and violence against specific communities, to the Great Resignation, as Alex touched on, which is obviously very much still in full swing. And then obviously later in the year, COP26 happened, as John talked about, and shone a bright light on the urgency of our climate crisis and the onus on business to lead the charge. And as we look ahead into 2022 and what we're seeing already, we can see that climate commitments are again going to be one, if not the most pressing issue that we're going to be spending a lot of the time focused on as client counsellors. And the good news is that people continue to be broadly supportive of businesses taking a stand on climate issues. Portobello found last year in a survey we did in the UK that 65% of people agree that moving forward post-lockdown, there is a real chance to have more productive conversations about the positive changes we want to see in the world, with climate issues consistently coming out as the issue that was top of their mind. And a report that was published earlier this month by Hanbury Strategy called Mind the Gap found that if respondents could choose a topic to focus on that wasn't focused on their core business, 44% would focus on protecting the environment, which we see as a really positive shift. That said, in the same survey, it was really clear that consumers, business leaders, media, employees are all starting to feel a bit of issue fatigue, as John touched on as well. You know, there is skepticism creeping in around corporate commitments and conversations around broader social justice issues, which is worrying. I'm sure you all saw the commentary that was touched on before around Terry Smith's comments over Unilever, obviously, and that's just one example about some people who are starting to position engagement around ESG issues as a distraction. And we anticipate this is going to continue to be a hotly debated topic in 2022, particularly as our media landscape in the UK continues to grow more complex, more competitive and combative, over new entrants such as Talk TV and GB News continuing to grow in influence. So it's up to us as communicators to continue to make the case for clients to push back on this narrative, to help our clients bring their stakeholders along with them on their own sustainability journalists, to give them the confidence, and as John pointed out, the data to continue to take a stand and continue to advocate for sustainable business practices. So if 2021 was the year that businesses had to close their say-do gap, we think that 2022 will be the year of the do-say gap. You know, because it's only about telling the stories that our clients telling the stories of the work that our clients are doing to play their part in the sustainable economy, that these conversations will continue to shift from being perceived as distractions to business as usual. Thank you.
Phil, love that. Thank you so much. Really interesting in light of recent comments and the so-called purpose backlash, which has been reported. So really a number of great points there about how we can stay true to those values. We are now on to our last presenter. So I'm really pleased to introduce Jo Ogunleye. Jo is a B2B communications lead at Google, where she covers ads, B2B partnerships, and a wide range of programs that contribute to the economic recovery of businesses post-COVID. She is a PR Week 2021 Power Book E, if that's a word, and under 30 under 30 alumni. She previously led TMT, transport and sports PR at the professional services firm KPMG, and worked at the governing body City of London Corporation's press office, as well as some of the UK's leading PR agencies. Jo, thank you for joining us. Really interested to hear your thoughts and considerations for 2021. So I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Gray, and for the introduction, and thanks for inviting me to take part. I was a bit of a last minute addition to the panel, and I did consider saying no because I was worried about the time I would have to prep in order to share meaningful insight. But, and this kind of brings me onto the topic that I want to talk about over the next couple of minutes, but what made me agree is that I'm constantly telling my mentees that their opinions, their views, their perspectives matter, regardless of their age, their social background, their nationality, their race, gender, or limited years of experience. I really want to see young PR professionals empowered to speak their mind and share their views. So I did say yes, and I will try and stay off my soapbox and keep this short. But yeah, so this might not be a trend yet, but I would definitely love for it to become a consideration, and that's to include the next gen perspective in our decision making, in our campaign brainstorms, in panels such as these. And this, kind of first became a passion when I was invited to speak at the PRCA National Conference celebrating 50 years a few years ago, and the theme was next gen. And I remember being so nervous because everyone in the audience was what felt like super senior in comparison to myself. And at the end of my speech, I had a question from the audience about how do we get diverse young talent to feel included? And I kind of responded by saying, well, look around the room right now. How many of you senior execs who came here today brought a member from the communities you're trying to target? And I think, I've mentioned this before, in the PRCA, I believe you do give discounted and free tickets for things like that to people from underrepresented groups. But that's just an example of something that I would love to see become more of a trend in this industry, bringing people along. So yeah, and it's super idealistic, but I always think back to why I joined the PR industry: the pursuit of truth, authenticity, storytelling with values as a priority, and that next gen representation, I believe, will keep us honest, and it's relevant at every level of our work, whether it's your audience, your brand audience, or the actual creators out there kicking trends off and out into the world. In YouTube's case, we've got huge viewership numbers in the 18 to 34-year old range, and obviously the emergence of TikTok over the last few years, and it's a space that everyone's very, very interested in keeping a hold of. And I feel like we often in the PR industry miss a trick because we are as John and Michael mentioned, we are looking for those headlines, we are looking for those kind of themes, and actually we need to be more vulnerable and open to learning and change, and attract that diverse next gen talent who want to be a part of that change. So yeah, I'm just really passionate about equipping and inspiring the next generation of PRs to bring their best and real and whole selves to work, and figuring out how to navigate these kind of times. And Corey mentioned I'm a trustee of the Taylor Bennett Foundation, which, if you don't know, exists to encourage people from Black, Asian, and minority ethnic backgrounds to pursue a career in communications. And again, I don't have any slides or anything, but I love an anecdotal story, and I did speak recently to a potential Black trainee who's looking to join TBF, and what I found so amazing was that he said he didn't even know where to start because he felt like there are so many existing and new initiatives. So again, if it isn't already a trend, we should see that as an opportunity, that there's a lot of choice, there's a lot of opportunity, there's a lot of options when it comes to where does someone from a diverse background begin. I don't think we should feel like, oh, there's already so many mentoring schemes out there. We should feel like there has to be, everywhere you look, there should be the potential for someone to find where their start could be, and feel invited and feel already as part of your strategy and plan. We talk about diversity a lot. You might not know what to do, but showing that your door is open, or you might not know where to start, that is a start in itself. And again, in terms of us as an industry, I feel like it should, when it comes to diverse talent and young talent, it should be around collaboration and not competition. So even without, a whole set of initiatives, although we know of amazing ones as part of the PRCA, we've got the Prism mentoring campaign, Taylor Bennett Foundation, we've got spring, summer, autumn, reverse mentoring program. Sorry if I'm speaking too fast. BME PR pros, people like us. Sarah's just mentioned her social mobile initiative. But even without all of these groups, I implore kind of all leaders to I know it's impossible, and my inbox is crazy busy on LinkedIn, but reaching out to millennials or Gen Zs in your teams or orgs, answering those random messages sitting in your LinkedIn inbox. Alex mentioned about recruiting outside of PR, or networking outside of PR. I have a mentee who studied public relations at uni, and we included a story in the PR Week anti-racism feature, which I guest edited in 2020. We included a feature about PR education, and while she's moved to marketing, let's not hold that against her. In fact, she actually joined Google this week. But while she's now moved to marketing, she studied PR, and her voice matters. And years later, she still talks about the fact that she was invited to take part in that magazine feature, even though, I've got like a year, she's got like a year under her, at the time, under her experience. But her voice matters, her perspective matters, and growing that confidence and diverse leadership, because one day she will be a leader, is so important. And so, I have waffled on, then I have just chatted and said my piece, but, I've got a note here as well, about the recent Edelman Trust Barometer, which came out, which said communications from my employer are now the most trusted source of information, and my employer is the most trusted of any institution. So I mean, it just exemplifies the fact that we have a huge responsibility when it comes to how we talk and include the next gen of PRs, and I will basically take any opportunity to remind people to do that. So I don't know if this was hugely organized conversation, but please keep in mind that point when you're thinking about trends for the rest of the year. Let's make it a trend.
Joe, thank you very much for that. I love that presentation, and in particular, I love the idea and the belief that actually each and every one of us has a real responsibility to help create the change on this. And you made some great points there about choosing the people who you bring to work events or to initiatives. I think it's such a really key important point. It's something that all of us can do from today. So thank you so much for your time on that, Joe. That concludes all our presentations. So we've flown through them in time, and we've got a little bit of time left over for questions, of which we have quite a few in the Q&A box. Alex, the first one is what came from Nadia, and it was in response to your presentation. And she's asking about the 4-day week. So she says, the UK is trialing a 4-day working week. How can agencies adapt to work towards a 4-day working week? And I know this is a conversation that's growing louder around the world, particularly in MENA at the moment, speaking to our colleagues in Dubai who are also trialing this. So what are your thoughts on it, and how do you see this playing out for agencies?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I'll hold my hands up. I'm not an expert on this, so this is just my own personal thoughts and opinions. And actually, it's interesting because we at Reuben Sinclair we trialed a 4-day week working week with a no cut in pay, and so exactly the same thing. We did it before COVID. Unfortunately had to stop when COVID hit, because I'm not sure if you know, but recruitment took a little bit of a dive, and so we were struggling slightly. But when we did it, I think there's always going to be an issue in any kind of client services led business, like a PR agency or a recruitment agency, where you have clients that might not necessarily be doing it as well. And I think that's where the issues arise. I think if everyone's doing it, everyone's on the same page, and certainly if everyone else has the same day off, then I think that makes it so much easier. But for us, when we did it, I think the key things really were, obviously time management is always going to be super important. You're doing the same amount of work, but in fewer days. And so you're going to have to be really kind of strict with your time. And I think for us, what was really key was having clear objectives and outputs and results that we wanted to get out of our days and our weeks, and focusing on them. And if what you were doing didn't kind of feed into them and wasn't going to affect them, then get rid of it, don't do it, it's a waste of time. And so focusing on outcomes and results as opposed to processes was really important for us. I think being really clear on what good looks like, and I think that feeds into the kind of results thing as well, that was really important. And then I think knowing what you're responsible for, and being really clear about what your role is, again, that kind of fits into the kind of results and outcome led approach. I think that was important. And then being really honest about how it was going, and constantly evaluating it. So we had every week we were evaluating it and sitting down with our line managers and going, okay, this is what I've actually struggled with. This is what I found really good about it. This is what I did with my extra time back from not working that day. But we were all quite honest, and actually it's really hard. It's really hard fitting 5 days work into 4. And I'm sure there's many people, I don't know whether they're on this call, but there's a lot of people that I speak to that work a part-time week and say, actually, I'm doing a full-time job working a part-time hours, and it's impossible. So it's not the easiest thing in the world, particularly in a client services led role where you are ultimately at the beck and call of other people. And even if you're not in a client services role, I suppose there are certain stakeholders and that kind of thing that you need to work towards. So I think just being honest with yourself about what you can and can't achieve in that time, and being honest with whoever your clients are, and be open about what you're doing, constantly evaluate it, and have that kind of, like I say, the results and outcome focused approach, I think those are probably my key things to making it work. Like I say, that's my opinion.
I think that, there's some excellent advice there. I think you're right to say being honest, and being honest with yourselves, amongst your colleagues and your clients, about what this new structure looks like and how it's working, and evaluating it throughout, I think is going to be important. But it's going to be really interesting to see what happens. I think more and more we'll be trialing it. John, we had more than a couple of questions relating to your presentation. We've had one that came in from Alexa, and she asks, how do you convince or counsel a nervous client to have a strong point of view when it comes to populism will force brands to pick a side?
Cool. Yeah, just for the record, I'd like to go to a 0-day working week, but for everyone to maintain 7 days worth of working, so I can go to like restaurants and things like that on my own. But in terms of the counselling a nervous client, I think one of the key areas to show is examples of where not picking or not having a strong point has resulted in a brand disappearing into the graveyard of brands that no one will ever remember. That's one quite good way of doing it, is to showcase how, a brand that has decided to take a very sitting on the fence for a long time is starting to lose its foothold. And I think there's quite clear examples of that in the corporate world, but also, scale up startup world as well. And then I think that the sort of the reverse of that, and I understand this is tricky in certainly at a point where everyone's measuring everything based on their share price. I think there's probably some better stats to also look at when taking into the full commercial picture, from employee retention to well-being to all sorts of other bits and pieces. But there's now quite a strong cohort of organizations that have, for example, a fairly obscure Californian sports brand dominating the fashion industry, in terms of market awareness and share, is a great, and I mean Patagonia, is a great example of a brand that has not been afraid to take a stand and then, be very clear about what it stands for, what it believes, and has done pretty well out of it. I think there's a history to be looked at here of organisations that have been willing to take that brave stand, that have been willing to kind of say this is who we are and what we're about, showcasing a performance in return. So I guess, find some examples, go out there, do some digging, do some research, build up your case, your business case. Yeah,
and as you say, there have been some fearless examples that have worked really well. Jennifer's asked a similar question about net zero, but I think you've covered a couple of the key concepts of that, and I'm conscious
net zero. If a net zero target without any form of evidence is fucking meaningless, so don't do it. We've had a doubling of organisations who have declared net zero targets, and only 7% report on them year on year. That tells you all you need to know. A target is just out there in the ether. I can set a target. I'm going to be 12 stone tomorrow. It's not going to happen. I'm going to have KFC tonight. It's just, it just has to have that kind of level of clarity. A year reporting year on year what that target is will see you right through that net zero kind of focus.
Amazing. And like you said, claims without evidence will be dismissed. So
absolutely,
thanks for that. Sarah, we've had one that's come in from John Clement, and he's asking about the PR profession. With its existing demographic, can we do more what can we do to encourage a more diverse intake of employees? How can the profession look more like a welcome place for a wider range of people? This is obviously a big question. Is there one thing that you could pick out, Sarah, that our audience could take away?
I've put my pasties down because this is a bit, I can get on this because I've got a really good answer for this, because I think the answer is the PR profession just needs to employ some good practice when it comes to recruitment and stop A, recruiting in its own reflection, and B, stop being so short term. Because you know what happens, we're all busy people, we either have someone off sick, we bring in a new client, we just need to get somebody else in, and what do? We just immediately knee jerk, go out, pay whatever we need to get the person we want in, and that person is probably someone who's just like everybody else in the team. Got to stop doing that, got to start thinking about our longer term plans, what we want, what we actually want in terms of the diversification of the talent workforce. And then you need to start building the employer brand and actually marketing to the audiences that you would like to attract in the spaces where they operate, instead of expecting them to come to you. It's as simple as that. We've just got to stop being lazy, be more long-term, and get on with it.
Brilliant. Amen.
Yeah,
of course, Joe.
And also for smaller organizations who want to diversify, want to support, and might not be able to hire at a certain time, you can still mentor, you can still go to schools which have a high BAME cohort, you can still network, you can still there are so many different ways to financially support, sponsor something, you know what I mean? So there's so many different ways you can explore. I almost feel like hiring, if you're not in a position to hire, it's almost not an excuse, but there's plenty you could do to support the diversification of the PR workforce as well. So think about it.
Thank you, Joe.
And just one more point on that as well, Corey. Like,
go for it.
Getting away from the obsession about having agency experience as well at that entry level, because what does that even mean? You know,
say it louder.
There's so many people that we're turning away when they're first interested in the industry because they don't completely fit in that box, or maybe haven't worked across various accounts. Of course they haven't. They've just started. It's crazy. Anyway.
Absolutely.
I literally see this every day, just as an FYI. Like, this is my life every single day. I get a job spec and it's like, must have the exact same experience as every other person that I've got in my company, and it's quite frankly infuriating. But you know, here we are.
It is infuriating. We're doing the same things but expecting different outcomes. It's madness. So let's hope this year is the year where we can finally see some much needed change. Absolutely. We do have lots of other questions, but I'm afraid we've run out of time. We're going to collate all of these and we'll get a blog going, and what we'll do is we'll come to our panelists and ask them to answer the ones that are specific to each one. But to everyone who's asked the question and who's joined in and engaged on the chat, thank you so much. This has been a really a brilliant assembling of minds from the industry, and we're really grateful to all of our panelists, Sarah, John, Phil, Michael, Alexandra, Joe. Thank you so much. It's been amazing. Do look out for this a recording of this session, which will be available on our YouTube channel. If you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, please subscribe. You'll get a notification when this goes live. And all that's left for me to do is say a massive thank you to both our audience and our panelists, and we hope to see you all again very soon. Thanks very much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Thanks all.